You talking about football?
Yeah, football. NFC North. Then let's talk football.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Headed North, an NFC North podcast, and I am your host, D-Tron. This week, we are coming to you a little bit later than usual. It is Friday the 12th, heading into Saturday the 13th. And let me say, the reason, of course, that we're coming to you later in the week is because we wanted to fully absorb the 2023 schedule for all four of the NFC North teams. There are going to be some big games for the NFC North. We already covered the schedule in a previous episode, and I told you exactly what I thought each team would do. But here's the thing. After reviewing the lineup and where some of these games fall, I'm feeling a little bit different about my Green Bay Packer prediction. Also, I feel very strongly that the Detroit Lions are going to win 13 games. This schedule has reaffirmed my feelings as a fan. I know it's fandom, so take that with a grain of salt, but I'm feeling pretty solid. Minnesota, it's not going to be as bad of a year as I originally anticipated, and Chicago might have a slightly tougher battle to that 500% or better, but I still think they can do it. So today, I'm going to cover 4 games for each team that are going to be vitally important to them having a successful season. Now, for each team, successful season is going to be different. Like the Green Bay Packers, if they just don't lose all of their games, feels like it might be successful because they got one big change that's going to stand in the way of their success. You know, I know, they know, it's quarterback. Don't seem like they got a whole lot of faith in Jordan Love, and so hopefully the way this schedule is built out, it will give him an opportunity to get some early wins under his belt. Speaking of early wins, I think that's where we're going to start with the Green Bay Packers today. But before we get into the Green Bay Packers, I'd just like to let you guys know about our sponsor for the show. Our sponsor for the show is OffRackShop.com. Off Rack Shop is an online thrift store. They have men's and women's clothing, accessories, shoes, and more. So if you haven't already, if you are on our YouTube page, head down to the description. You'll see a code for 15% off your entire order. If you are listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, go to our show notes. We've got a link to 15% off your entire order from offrackshop.com. Thank you guys over at Off Rack Shop for sponsoring our show today. Green Bay. So the 4 games that are going to be most important for Green Bay this year are going to be right at the beginning of the season. Green Bay needs to get off to a fast start. If they can get some early wins, that might be the key to unlocking some confidence in Jordan Love. If he comes out and loses the first 5 or 6 games, that's not going to bode well for his sense of job security. And that's also not going to bode well for his confidence in leading that team through what is certainly going to be a challenging year. So the 4 games that I have that are going to be very important to the Green Bay Packers are going to be right at the beginning of their season. Chicago Bears in Chicago, Atlanta Falcons in Atlanta. They'll play at home against New Orleans. They'll play at home against Detroit. They'll play at Las Vegas, and then they get a bye week. The 4 games that I think are most important on this trip are weeks 1, 2, 3, and 5, because they're going to take that L against the Lions in Detroit. That's also a Thursday night game. Lions are coming off of playing Atlanta. I don't think that they're going to be too beat up after that game that they could potentially drop one to the Green Bay Packers. I did say that they would beat the Las Vegas Raiders in Las Vegas, and that they would beat Atlanta in Atlanta. So those things I said on the previous show, and I still believe that to be true. But I didn't think that they were going to beat Chicago in Chicago, and I didn't think they were going to beat New Orleans in New Orleans. But if they can, right? They end up running off a 4-1 start to their season prior to the bye week. And then coming off of the bye week, they have the Denver Broncos and the Minnesota Vikings. Again, a divisional game with Minnesota where anything can go with divisional opponents. And then the Denver Broncos, who we anticipate are going to be a better team because of a new head coach. But we don't actually know that. If the Green Bay Packers come out and run 4-1 in their first 5 games, go on a bye week and then come back and smack up the Denver Broncos and give the Vikings a run for their money, You're talking about a completely different level of confidence in that organization and that quarterback. This could be the makings of, going on a magical run. I'm not saying the Green Bay Packers are going to make the playoffs. Certainly not going to say they're even going to contend for the divisional title. But what they can do is set themselves up to not have a miserable year and to give Green Bay fans something to look forward to. So I think right off the bat, Green Bay's got to come out very, very strong. Beating Chicago in Chicago, beating Atlanta in Atlanta, and then knocking off New Orleans and Las Vegas before going on a bye week. That gives them a whole lot of confidence. There's some other key games in there that we're not going to really talk about. They've got their Christmas Eve game in Carolina at Carolina, and then they have a New Year's Eve game against Minnesota at Minnesota, which could be a bit of revenge depending on how that week 8 game plays out. So there's a lot of excitement on Green Bay's schedule, although I don't anticipate them being a very exciting team, honestly. All right, so moving on to Chicago. I actually had Chicago winning 9 games this year. I think the tail end of their schedule, much like getting a fast start for Green Bay, is going to be important. How Chicago finishes will be very important to how they end up overall this year and how they feel about their year as a whole. They finish with Green Bay in their final week. That's January 7th. That's a to be determined time, but it's definitely going to be on that Sunday, January 7th. They've got Atlanta, Arizona, and Cleveland to end their schedule. Those are 4 very winnable games. As a matter of fact, I had them winning all 4 of those games on our prediction show. There's no reason that the Chicago Bears can't add 4 wins in the final week of their season. That's coming off of the bye week. They only have 5 games after the bye week. One of those is against Detroit in Chicago, and I actually have them winning that game in the prediction show. So if it ran off like I thought it would, after the bye week, the Chicago Bears would go 5-0. If Chicago Bears go 5-0 in their last 5 games, that's really going to put them in contention for a potential playoff spot. I know. I'm talking playoffs for the Chicago Bears, but they've got a chance to run off those last 5 games. Now it gets a little spotty in the middle of the season because they've got Detroit in Detroit when they play good at home, playing against Carolina, the Chargers, Minnesota team, which could be a coin toss. Certainly probably not going to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, but they have a pretty solid schedule that allows them to play teams like Green Bay, first week of the season. Washington is in there, who aren't very good. Don't know what Las Vegas is going to be like with Jimmy G, but I don't think that Las Vegas Raiders are going to be all that great. And then, the New Orleans of the world, who on any given day could be good or could be bad. So I think Chicago Bears have a real good chance, again, of making the playoffs, getting those 9 wins if they can run off that last 5 at the tail end of their season. Certainly the last 4 with Green Bay, Atlanta, Arizona, and Cleveland, which, again, it's Cleveland at Cleveland, Green Bay at Green Bay to end the season. Arizona, they're going to play in Chicago, and Atlanta, they're going to play in Chicago. So that's what I got as the most important games for the Chicago Bears. If they run the tail end of their season, it's looking pretty good for them. All right, so now we move on to my Detroit Lions, and they have a wild schedule. I want you to know, because I'm a Detroit Lions fan, this feels good to me, but I'm pretty sure that there's other people in this boat with me. The rest of the country wants to cheer for the Lions. They want to see them play. I take that back. That's kind of delusional of me. Most people aren't trying to watch my Lions play, but let me tell you this. They're going to see them a lot because they've got 3 Thursday night games. 3 Thursday night games. They've got a Monday night game and they got a Sunday night game. Boy, let's get our shine, okay? Let the Detroit Lions get this shine. Let me talk about the 4 games that I think are going to be most important. The very first game that they play against the Kansas City Chiefs, opening night of the NFL schedule. Side note, I will be in attendance, already got my ticket for this game. It's going to be hype in Kansas City. Now, because I'm a Lions fan does not mean that I am delusional. I'm not saying that we're going to go into Kansas City and blow out the Kansas City Chiefs or even beat them. but it is certainly the kind of game that sets the tone for the rest of the beginning of your season. You don't want to come out and stumble here and have every other opponent view you as just the Detroit Lions again. We need to come out and give the Kansas City Chiefs everything they can handle in Kansas City. And if we get a win, amazing. But if we don't, we get a chance to set the tone for the rest of our season. The second game that I think is vitally important is when we play Seattle week 2 in Detroit. We have to beat Seattle. This is a bit of revenge from last year, but also coming off of a loss. You don't want to stack losses together, especially now when you're trying to win 13 games this year. So coming out after the Kansas City game to play Seattle in Seattle midday is good for us. Now, the next game that I think is going to be very important is Monday night against the Las Vegas Raiders. Again, it's the spotlight. It's everybody watching. How do you perform in big moments? Do you earn the stage that they've been giving you for this season? And the answer has got to be yes. You've got to play in Detroit Monday night, and you've got to wear the Las Vegas Raiders out. These are the kind of games that you get to make a statement, and you can then present yourself as a completely different organization moving forward. So I think the Kansas City game is going to be important. Playing Seattle week 2 is going to be important. Las Vegas Raiders in week 8 is going to be important. And then the next game that I have, or the last game that I have, is a Sunday night game against Dallas. That game is December 30th. That's a Saturday. We're playing at Dallas. Of course, I will actually be at that game too, being that I reside in Texas. Can't miss that game. We are going to be playing the Dallas Cowboys very late in the season and could have significant ramifications for what happens in the NFC playoff picture. There's no way that the Detroit Lions and the Cowboys aren't both vying for positioning in the playoff picture. So week 17 can be very important to both of these organizations. So I think that the Lions have to come in and do very, very, very precise work against the Dallas Cowboys. If not, the moment could slip away from them. And depending on how the rest of the season goes, that game could be a deciding factor in where they place in the conference. And it could also impact playoff potential, period. So I think the Kansas City Chiefs, the Seattle Seahawks, that's week 1 and week 2. Then you've got the Las Vegas Raiders in week 8, should be a statement game. And then week 17, the Dallas Cowboys and playoff ramifications. That's going to be huge. Just as a refresher, I got the Detroit Lions winning 13 games this season. Call me crazy, but we'll all be able to see, and this will be audio proof of how right and or wrong that I was. And so this week, we're going to end the show with the Minnesota Vikings. I said that the Minnesota Vikings were going to win 7 games this year, which is a pretty stark contrast from what they did last season, winning 13. The Minnesota Vikings have a tough beginning schedule. Check this out. They play Tampa Bay in Minnesota. Then they go to Philly. Then they play Los Angeles Chargers. Then they go to Carolina. Then they play the Chiefs. Then they go to Chicago. Then they play San Francisco. That's tough. So that's your week 1 through 7. I've got them beating Tampa Bay. Then I have them losing the next 6 games. So for the Minnesota Vikings, what is going to be important for them is trying to steal one of those 6 games and what they do with the following 3. So I think they can potentially steal the game in Carolina. So that's week 4, October 1st. It's a Sunday afternoon game. If Minnesota can go in and steal a win against Carolina, that breaks up some of the losses that they certainly have coming at the beginning of their schedule. And then after the San Francisco game in week 7, they go on to play Green Bay, Atlanta, and New Orleans. So if they steal the win from Carolina in week 4, that will give them 2 wins out of their first 8 weeks, and then they can come back and knock off Green Bay in week 8, Atlanta in week 9 at Atlanta, and then week 10 against New Orleans. That would give them 5 wins and most of the way to the 7 wins that I predicted that they were going to get. But their schedule doesn't ease up. They then play Denver as a Sunday night game. They play Chicago again, which I think they can get the win there. Then they play Las Vegas. I think they get the win there. So that's their other 2 wins that I see them getting. But then it's Cincinnati, Detroit. They play Green Bay one more time, and then they play Detroit to end their season off January 7th. So the Minnesota Vikings got a tough sled. But, and I say but, if they can steal that Carolina game, if they could steal the Chicago game, right? These are some ifs. But if they do that, they go 3-4 in their first 7 games. That sets them up potentially for a 9-game win season and potentially putting them right up there in contention with Chicago Bears for second place in the division, because I think Detroit Lions are going to be the first team in the division. Of course, anything is possible, but that's the way I got it laid out with my predictions. If you feel differently, please find a way to chat with me. I love to talk about this stuff. Hit me up on Instagram. I am at Headed North Podcast. If you want to talk on YouTube, our YouTube page is Headed North Podcast. We're on Twitter, although we're hardly ever on there. And if you just want to chat, feel free to hop over to the Instagram page. I love talking in the comments about these predictions. I'll repost all of my predictions for the teams, and we'll post up some of the schedules for the teams as well as we head into what is going to most certainly be an awesome 2023 NFL season. So that's all I got for you guys. As always, I appreciate you listening, coming along this journey. If you're still here, thank you very much. And if you come back next week, and I really hope that you do, make sure that you got your bags packed, because we are headed north. I'm D-Tron. Peace. You talking about football?
Yeah, EP12, NFC, North. Let's talk football.